deduction, rationality, or whatever. And sometimes they can intermix. Like, for example, for you to make premises, you have to have some induced, like inductively reason. Sometimes, possibly. No, but like, for example, I say all men are mortal. Yeah, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. I still have to have perceived a man, and I have to have known what men are through my five senses. So induction and deduction mix with each other in that way. But intuition is kind of a standalone thing. So it comes by itself. It's like you just know you exist. You just know you. If I were to ask you how would you prove it logically, there would not necessarily be a method which you could use.
So isn't it then a belief then, by definition?
It's first person experience.
That's a form of belief, I think.
You can. The thing is,
Trust in your senses, right?
look, the way Bertrand Russell talked about it, he wrote a book called The Problems of Philosophy, which is like one of the main basic books that a student of philosophy would learn.
Yeah, he's a logician, right? So.
Yeah, and what he said was that he defined knowledge, he defined belief as something which corresponds to, which is some information someone has which corresponds to, or either doesn't or does correspond to reality of some sorts. So true belief is that which does correspond to reality, and false belief is that which does not correspond to reality. So the point is, belief and knowledge and belief are not two different things. Almost all knowledge you have is believed in you. You could argue, right?
I agree. I do believe.
So, but the point is how did we achieve the knowledge? That's the more foundational question. So, did you know it? And if you did know it, was it self-evident, and so on? So we say, look, things like existence, there's no syllogism for how I can reason my own existence. There's no inductive method I can use to reason not just my own first-person subjective experience, but anything first-person at all, emotions included. Therefore, these things are unscientific in the sense that science does not have an access to them. So from that perspective, existence cannot be proven scientifically unless one reasons in a circle and says that we're going to check up human brains. But then if you're saying that you're checking up human brains using your first person experience, then you'll be arguing in a circle, because you'll say, how do we know it's the human brain exists as the mind? You'll say we're using the mind to check the brain, and therefore we'll be arguing in a circle. So therefore, first person experiences are first person experiences. Science is in the third person, which means you have to do something to something. Whereas first person experiences, I'm speaking about my own thing. So these are different forms of knowledge, and that's why if you the beginning thing you said, you started off by saying that, well, could you not doubt everything? If we're using induction, abduction, or even deduction, I would agree with you, and I would agree with Fakhruddin al-Razi, who also said the same thing as you, which is that everything is ghalibu dhannin. Everything is a high probability. Like, we don't know anything for sure. However, if we put in the intuitive element, which is what Ibn Taymiyyah said in his contribution, then we have intuitive experiences, first person, which require no rationalization, systematic rationalization there. There's no discursive rationalization. In other words, you don't need to go for an inductive method or an abductive method or a deductive method. They can just reason it. You just kind of no. It would be beyond that. It would just be something you feel.
How much can you trust feelings, though?
Yeah, so that's a question that goes back to you. So that's what Nietzsche like. Nietzsche was saying, I think, therefore I am, is problematic, because how do you know it's you that's thinking? So that's why probably the most concrete statement of fact you can make ever is that there is no doubt that there is existence. Now, how do we know that there is existence? Through feeling that. Now, if we don't have that intuitive knowledge, we wouldn't know existence existed. Now, obviously, it's corroborated by inductive methods, but it's not standard. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So, what we say as Muslims is that you're born with the belief that you exist, but also the belief in God. One God created, whatever, all those things. So you don't need, you don't need rationality in order to come to the conclusion of God. That's basically our premise.
You have the fitra.
You have the fitra, yeah. Because you're born with it, and you're not born believing in Jesus Christ, as God, or the Trinity, or Guru Nanak as the Guru, or even Prophet Muhammad, frankly, as a prophet. But you're born with just this intrinsic kind of submission to a higher being. That's how we kind of conceive it.
Isn't the only alternative to believing that God created reality is that I created reality? Isn't that the only alternative?
There's many alternatives like that. Like I said before, I is a presupposition.
Yeah.
So that's what Nietzsche said. I is a presupposition. It's a possessive presupposition. But the thing is about creation now is a question of, we haven't even reached that point yet, because creation requires more like rationalization, cause and effect, dependency, all those arguments that are made. But we're just still at the base rate of existence. Like, how do I know I'm here? I know because I feel it. That's actually a great answer. I feel that God exists is a legit expression of knowledge.
Mohammed, I wanted to talk to you about Extinction Rebellion because I was here back in, I think, March or something.
Yes.
I was talking to you about it.
But can I just finish with him and then?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, so the instinct or intuition, you're saying this is more trustworthy than sense data and...
I think it's more foundational, because
What do you mean foundational?
everything else depends on intuition.
Yeah. But why is that not a form of belief, like faith?
Well, look,
Intuition, you're staking some faith in what you perceive.
if you don't have a premise that we exist, then nothing can be said about anything, right? So what I'm saying is that premise.
We work under the assumption.
Pardon?
We're working under that assumption.
Yeah. So because of that, what I'm saying is that because you're working under that assumption that we exist, and that's an intuited assumption. It's not. You don't put that under a microscope. You don't put that into a chart. You don't deduce that. You feel that. You literally experience that. So because of that, it's the most foundational thing. Everything else depends on it. In fact.
There's also how you define it as well, right? Because obviously there's some cultures define existence in a different way. So their intuition would say, yeah, we exist, but in a different format to the way that maybe we describe our existence, right? You have pantheists and stuff like this. They have that intuition, but their concept of existence is completely different.
Well, there is something.
Something.
There is something. I don't think you can get more foundational than that. So nothing. Only nothing doesn't exist. There is an absence of nothingness. Do you see the point? There is an absence of nothingness. If we don't start with the assumption that there's an absence of nothingness, then we can't go anywhere. Well, now the question is, why is there something rather than nothing? And that's a very, like, if you don't answer that, if you don't ask that question to yourself in this life, it's like you haven't asked yourself anything. It's like, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is it not just? Why is there not a continuation of nothingness?
And to exist in a state of agnosticism on that topic,
It's impossible. Because even having agnosticism, saying I don't know, is saying I. By the way,
this is your topic.
I'll just hear out here.
saying
I'll listen in the beginning.
agnostics will say I don't know.
But why is it right?
Agnostics say I don't know. So, but when you say I don't know, you're making a statement of knowledge.
But this is skepticism.
Yeah, you're saying I don't know. How do you know you don't know?
Yeah.
How do you know you don't know?
Well,
It's a
okay.
statement. Yeah, right.
Think about it this way. You
Yeah, how you
think
doing? You're right.
you think that you know something.
I like this
You
one.
might think that you don't know something, but you think so. You're not absolutely sure that you don't know something. As I usually say, the full certainty is not comparable
we
to
just had that discussion.
the wise man's doubt.
But okay, doubt. When you say doubt, how do you define doubt?
Doubt is not being absolutely and utterly 100%
Sure, right? But you're somewhat sure.
Oh yeah, of course.
All right, so you know
I have my
something.
senses, I have my approximation, but I understand that my senses are flawed, and thus I can't.
So you're on the same path as I am. So I'm saying that the foundation. What I was saying to him is that foundationally, we have to say that there is something rather than nothing, and there's no room for agnosticism on this.
That's the assumption that I follow, even though I'm not sure of it.
And by the way, agnosticism proves this premise. So if someone says, "Look, brother, I forgot your name, Ramsey. Yeah. Do you know the question that you asked about? Can there be agnosticism on the first premise of there is.
Maybe, but if you're in that state, why is that?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that the first thing we said, the most foundational thing we can have in terms of a knowledge premise that I can possibly think of, I said there's no doubt that there's existence. He said, okay, well hold on, existence can be quantified or qualified.
Which way does existence exist?
But what I'm saying here is, what I said to him was, we'll go even deeper than that, yeah? There is no doubt, forget about there's no doubt, there is something, that's my premise.
Okay, fine.
There you have it.
You can assume it.
Yeah, there is something rather than nothing.
Yeah, of course, sure.
Yeah, of course. So see, there's no agnosticism on that point.
No, but in which way does that something exist?
That's a different question.
I'll give you an
Yeah,
example.
no, I'm not going to. I'm not going there.
It's very relevant.
Yeah, I'm not going there though.
Mohammed, it's very relevant for this. Let me tell you why. Your reflection in the mirror, it exists. It exists just like you do. However, it's only a reflection. It's not you. It's only an image of you in the mirror. It exists the same way you do, and at the same time, it's a different way of existing, even though it exists in the same plane of existence as you do. You know what I mean?
Yes.
To quantify existence and to qualify existence is where all the uncertainty comes, because something is. Something is.
Yeah. So that's
for
no
sure.
problem. But what something is. That's
Sure.
I like the way you put that. Something is, yeah, rather than nothing is.
Sure.
So we can actually falsify the statement that nothing is.
Well, okay, then we come again to the example of the mirror image. The mirror image exists, but it's not you. It's
Yeah,
not
no, but
a thinking
what's your name again, bro? Sorry.
Pavlov.
Pavlov. All right. So basically, what I was saying was that look. So there are some things we can falsify.
Of course, always.
Right? No, but
always falsify.
no. Like, because you were saying that there's something. Like, this was the discussion before you came along. The discussion before you came along is how do you know something is 100%? Is not everything susceptible to some kind of casting of aspersion? And we said that yes, but there's one thing which you cannot cast any philosophical aspersion of, and if you do, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot, which is this premise that something is.
Something is, sure.
Right? Because if you say I'm agnostic to the fact that something is, your agnosticism is evidence that something is, which is your agnosticism. Right. But you see the point here? So it's that.
I don't think you're working at agnosticism.
Yeah. So if we start with something is, that premise that something is something which is so foundational that it's almost unfalsifiable. In fact, the opposite of it, which is nothing, is totally falsifiable.
Which is why a lot of the skeptics don't talk at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant. Exactly. So here, that's the thing. If we say something is, now the question would be why, or how, or what.
The nature of it.
Yeah.
Ooh, those are very, very
Or who even, yeah. You see, and that's when we come to the conclusion that, okay, we can't really come to conclusions right away, but we can ask the question, and this is what I believe is the first question we should be all asking. If we can falsify that nothing does not exist, or nothing is not a correct statement in its entire sense of the word, then the question is, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah. Well, that's my question.
Because without something, nothing doesn't exist.
Say again?
Without something, nothingness doesn't exist.
No, you
Say
say
that
why
again?
though?
Yeah, why?
Okay. I usually give this example. Imagine a blank piece of paper, and you make a drawing.
It's the wrong example, man. Because I know what you were saying, but he's just
Go
saying
ahead.
the question is why is there something than nothing? It's not talking about the idea of nothing can't be possible without lining it with
Why is
something
there
else.
something?
Assuming there is something.
Yeah.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
The purpose of existence.
Maybe I
is like
misunderstood.
that. Yeah.
So what do you think the challenge is with not maybe ignoring the question or not treating it with the same?
No. Here's what I think. That look. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Why is it so important?
Yeah, that's because that's the foundational thing. If you didn't have the premise that there's something is, then we couldn't have any conversation. We wouldn't have any cognition. We would have no rationalization. There would be nothing to talk about, in a sense. The existence couldn't be justified.
Asking the question why it exists.
Why?
Why is that important?
Why is there something rather than nothing?
No. Why does anything exist?
Why does anything exist is another way of putting it. Well, it's an important question because it's the foundation for everything we're doing in our lives.
But if you have a belief that you can't know that, for example, what's wrong with that?
Look, importance is subjective, right? You can say it's not important. You can say I don't care about that question. I can say it is important.
Existentialists will say that it's a secondary thing. It's not.
I see your point, but what I'm saying is that it's all like subjective. In a sense, you can make a point that it's not important. But this is where it becomes a bit of a theological discussion, or let's say philosophical discussion. Why is there something rather than nothing? My point would be this, is that atheism offers no answers to that question.
You know, I'm glad that Will interrupted me, because I think he was right about what he said. I wasn't really answering to the question. I thought of a different example. This is going to be a little experiment I'm going to do here. Let me ask you guys, does a pink flying elephant exist?
What, in your mind or something?
Now it exists because you imagined it. Okay. But the existence of the pink flying animal in your mind is obviously not the same quantification and qualification of existence as a real, tangible, physical world pink flying elephant.
Okay.
Yeah. It still exists in here, in your imagination, but it's not the same.
It's perceived in a different way.
Exactly. I think that's the focus you need to take. We might be the product of the imagination of a being infinitely more powerful than us.
Okay.
And if we are that product of imagination, then you are right. And we truly are completely and utterly powerless in the face of Allah or God or.
That's all I needed to get from you, man.
Whoever you want to talk about.
That's all I need to say. I'm joking.
Go into the probability of.
But no, the point I'm
Exactly.
Do you know?
Of what I said being true.
Yeah, forget about probability for now, because we're trying to work on foundations. Because you can't build castles on thin air, right? So when we have this idea of okay, there's something rather than nothing, and now we question, why is there something rather than nothing? Now we got to ask ourselves, of the systems that are out there, philosophical, religious, or otherwise, what is incapable of answering this question? It's impossible for an atheist to have any tools to answer this question. Because atheism...
For anybody to answer this question.
No. I would say that atheism has nothing to offer. It has no explanatory power. Pantheism has something, polytheism has something, monotheism has everything else, but that atheism has no explanatory power whatsoever at this point.
You think you need the metaphysical?
That's why I'm not an
to answer
atheist.
that question.
See, this is how we slowly get them out of...
Do you believe you have to have some
You gotta get
Pardon?
the
Do you
gacha
believe you have to
mode.
have a metaphysical basis to address the question? You can't answer the question without metaphysics. You can only answer it with metaphysics.
I think that foundationally, it's an intuitive metaphysics, so yeah, in that sense. Remember we said that...
But you said humans have intrinsic...
Yeah, that's the metaphysics.
But I think that's a belief, is that, that's...
Yeah, but it's not something physical, is it? Because metaphysics is that which is not physical.
Do you feel you have
What did you say about
do you believe you have an innate disposition to believing in God? Do you think there's something in you?
That is a very interesting thing that we could talk about, and I actually changed my mind about that. Nowadays, most people who live have some kind of faith, some kind of belief. Maybe in a God, maybe in an entity, maybe in energy. Some people just believe in energy.
But in a higher source, in a higher power. Right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Most people, the vast majority of people, have some kind of belief. And why is that? Why is it that the vast majority of people come to that conclusion? Well, because the people who chose a purpose for them, who chose to believe in something, are the ones who were more competitive in the game of life previously. They are the ones whose genes were passed on and whose similarities were passed on to their children, and thus it has been accumulated with generations and generations and generations that people have this, most of the people have this idea that something must exist beyond me. You know what I mean?
It's every civilization in history. There is no example of prehistoric or historic...
So it seems like an inbuilt
there's no
drive,
atheist
right?
civilization in history.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Purpose
You
for
could look at it
themselves.
as an outgrowth of the analytical capacity of the human mind.
Some people
Because
do.
we look for actors within the world.
Yeah.
We see someone doing something, we infer a motivation. We see something in the natural world.
Yeah.
We naturally want to infer a conscious motivation.
Agency, yeah.
Agency, exactly. So that is more or less an explanation for the outgrowth of a spiritual tradition, I would say.
One of the explanations.
That's an explanation,
Yeah.
for example.
So
What
you
I
would say
wanted
it's-
to find out from you is if you're saying if there is a something instead of nothingness.
Alex, I'm sorry, the brother here was just asking me a question. I'll come to you soon. Yeah.
You mentioned that there was a something,
Yeah.
and that something, is there a time where that something will cease to exist, or will that something exist forever?
So my understanding is that if there's something rather than nothing, for that something to be in existence, it must depend on something that is always in existence.
Always in existence.
Yeah, because if it isn't, then how do we explain its existence?
Maybe we can't.
No, and this goes back to the question of, and this is what I like the dependency argument for the God's existence, right? I say something has got to be necessary in his existence, something which has no beginning. Pardon?
Argument for contingency.
Yes. So
Why do we assume that?
because you can't have an infinite regress of dependent things.
But this is a philosophical point again.
No, you can. You can have an infinite regress. The point, I mean, mathematically speaking, is a bit tough. But I think the point is very simple. Our mind requires something to be eternal, whether it's the universe itself or God. The Big Bang theory seems to suggest that the universe is a contingent, but it doesn't prove that the universe is a contingent. So I think the Big Bang theory suggests the universe has a beginning, and therefore it may suggest there might be something that causes existence. So now, whether it is God or the spaghetti monster, the point is that whatever you call it, friend, God, the point is that it has certain characteristics which are is timeless, spaceless, and probably it has the power to cause something. And that's the traditional view of God.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the whole thing with the spaghetti monster, the problem with it is that it's not power, it's not timeless.
I mean,
and
it's
space.
a man. I mean, of course, it's an object. Yeah, so it's not like something like consciousness or whatever.
So that's what I'm saying. The thesis that there's something which is necessary existence is a very compelling thesis. Now,
I think it's a good argument.
Yeah, but the thing is that the nature of it can't be really. We can't really speculate on the nature of it. Like you said, necessity, eternality, oneness, and the fact that it's not made out of parts or dependent parts. You can go that far, but you can't say that. Well, it's loving, it's merciful.
But to make it even simpler, I don't know if you know William Craig.
Yeah.
He put it like very simple, because he said, suppose that you got an explanation for something, which makes sense. Like, for example, say you find like machines on the backside of the moon, and you say, oh, there must be intelligence here.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where this intelligence comes from, or you know how it looks like, what it looks like, it doesn't mean that you need to reject the explanation. So the explanation is still good, even if you don't know where this intelligence comes from, or what it looks like. Because by doing so, you don't have explanation what's happening.
Agreed.
So I think it's a very good argument. I think atheists struggle with it here.
Yeah, I think they would.
I'm still trying to understand from a human mind the way we create stories. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But what you're saying, that beginning has always been infinite, has always been there. So we can't actually trace when it started. That's what you're saying.
Well, so we need something which has no beginning.
So it has no beginning and it has no end. And we, as humans, we're just simply passing through from that existence.
So we're explicable, or where the preponderance of the universe is explained through this necessary eternal agency. That everything that's dependent is ultimately dependent on something which is independent. It's as simple as that.
And then all of this, though, comes back to just belief.
That's actually something which is quite rational. So remember we talked about different fields of knowledge. This is more deduction now.
All right.
Yeah, so this is something we're rationalizing.
Okay, there's a little problem with this ideology. So we are denying the infinite regression, instead choosing that, okay, there is a beginning cause, right, which you call God.
But before you continue, I think you mentioned causation. Causation is not always required for dependency.
Which way?
So you can have something which depends on something else and which is not caused by it. Let me give you an example, right? So for example, I can build a house. So I'm the cause for a house being built, but I die and the house continues living, right? So the house is not dependent on me, but it's caused by me. You see that point?
exists, yeah.
So the person who built this building behind us, or the people, they caused it to exist. Or maybe the horse head didn't build it. They caused it to exist. But that horse head no longer depends on.
Yeah, but for there to be more houses, there need to be more people building them.
Accepted. But so what I'm saying is causation, which is defined as something which brings rise to phenomena, is different to dependency, which means something relying on something else. So for the house doesn't require those people that built it to rely on it. So when we say that everything dependent depends upon something else which is dependent, then you need to have something independent to allow all dependent things to exist. And not necessarily every cause has every effect has a cause, although that can be made. The same argument can be made.
Not necessarily
in
every
conjunction.
event has a cause.
Yeah, because you can say, look, you can say, for the sake of argument, I'm going to have an infinite regress of causes. And like you said, it's conceivable. It's not. Even though I would say it's pretty difficult to conceive.
Yeah, it's hard to feel, but it can be.
It's almost. I would say. I would say it's for me it's illogical, but I can understand why someone would say that it's a timeless, as in multiverse backwards. Yeah, I can understand why. But then the question would be, what does that multiverse depend on?
I got it wrong, man. But nice talking to you anyway.
You too, man.
I'll see you always.
So that's what.
The problem of the
But there's one thing I want to say, like that's from our theological Islamic perspective. Well, if you look at the basic definition of God, it's literally that. It's a Qul huwa Allahu ahad, He's one and only. Allahu samad, the thing that everything depends upon, and He depends upon nothing. The independent one, basically. That is eternal. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. That He doesn't give birth, nor is He to give birth. Walam yakul lahu, there's nothing like Him. Walam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, there's nothing like Him. So He's the necessary existence. So what we would say is that William Lane Craig, you mentioned him, he would take it that far, he would agree with these points, but then he would say God is 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, which is Trinity God. We would say that's problematic. So that's why we would say, look.
I think it doesn't really matter. At least when
Trinity does.
I think the problem with religions. They can be right, all of them. So one of them can be right, but I think that one of them can be right, but I think that all of them they try to use God arguments, like which philosophical arguments are really good, and they try to track them back to their religion. But I think it's not very fair because there's no direct connection between Islam and the God hypothesis. There's no direct connection between the Christians and the God hypothesis. So I think that the God hypothesis is something that needs to be taken separately, and then you can move to.
I actually agree. I agree with you.
Move to religion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But I think there is very good evidence for God.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure.
What evidence is that?
Wait.
What we were just discussing.
This is a completely different ramification of the conversation. But we need to know this. But before you do it, let me just clarify what I was saying. The same way that you use God to get out of the infinite regression paradox, God also is an infinite regression by Himself, because God is infinite. And no matter how
But it wouldn't be a regression because it wouldn't go back. It just stays back.
If God is infinite, there are many parts of infinity that contradict each other. If God is infinite in wisdom, knowledge, benevolence,
we wouldn't say that is infinite.
power,
Say that
they
is eternal.
contradict each other.
The thing is, we haven't got to that stage yet, as we said, right?
Yeah.
He's right. The point that he made is interesting. Let me just quickly mention it. So he said that you're right. I would agree with you that you can't really say, okay, well, this is the God of, like I just said, right? This is the God of Quran, whatever, and therefore you have to be Muslim. That would be a ridiculous argument. But what we can do is we can say anything that does not fit these parameters that we've just talked about would be problematic because it's illogical. So for example, if I said God is a man, sorry to say, yeah? So well, if you say God is a man, that denies his the eternity, the necessity, the so on and so forth. So we might not be able to. But we might. So what I'm saying is that we might not be able to prove religion necessarily in that sense, but we can dismiss religion. So we can say, look, this religion that says a chicken is God or a goat is God or a human being is God is a false religion because it says that, okay, something which is meant to be unlimited is limited at the same time, which is a contradiction.
if
So,
God
and,
has
yeah,
unlimited
yeah,
power,
yeah.
he has the power to limit his power, to limit himself,
then-
or even to
I
destroy himself.
I don't see any contradiction there.
No, but hold on. But then, can I just come back on that? If God limits his power, if this necessary existence limits his power to being not to being limited, then it stops being the necessary existence.
Well, he still has the possibility of coming back
No, but
to how he
then it would
was,
stop being God, right?
like Jesus.
No, but here's the thing: how would the question would be? What would be the explanation for the universe in that stage?